In other world news, Conservative candidate Karol Nawrocki has won Poland's presidential runoff. He beat his Liberal rival, Warsaw Mayor Trzaskowski, by a narrow margin. His victory could have implications for the EU's politics and the war in Ukraine. The president-elect is a Eurosceptic, and although it's a largely ceremonial role, he'll have the authority to veto legislation. He's called immigration a major problem for the bloc and urged setting up deportation centres for undocumented migrants rather than transit facilities. Let's bring in Hashem Ahelbarra, who's in Warsaw following this election for us and the victory of Nawrocki. A knife-edge election, but a clear win for Nawrocki. What does this mean for Poland, Hashem?
Well, Folly, this is a major setback for the Liberals and the centrists, and a big victory for the Conservatives, as today they stayed up late at night watching the developments, the preliminary results, which gave Karol Nawrocki that very thin margin, and which he managed to maintain, which means that he kept that momentum he started during the first round of the election intact, with another push by the Conservatives and also some potentially the far right. That's the reason why he managed that victory. It means that in the upcoming years, we're going to see the president doing exactly what Andrzej Duda was doing, which is vetoing any legislation that he sees as totally against the very spirit of the conservative movement. The Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, said that he was going to further introduce major institutional judiciary reforms and also relax some of the country's abortion laws, which are some of the strictest in Europe. That is not going to happen anymore with Karol Nawrocki. So this is going to be expanding the influence of the conservative movement across Poland. So this is definitely going to be widely perceived to be a major setback for the Liberals and the centrists, who were hoping that a victory by Trzaskowski was going to start a radical reform of the country, particularly the judiciary, and building more bridges with the EU.
And so what have been the reactions then in Poland and beyond?
Now, Poland, yesterday was a dramatic late, long night, so no reaction so far. Still morning here in Warsaw. Across Europe, we've seen some statements coming up from the German President Frank Steinmeier congratulating Nawrocki and calling for stronger relations between Germany and Poland. The Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also saying that this is should be a moment for both countries, for both EU and Poland, to expand partnership. But you know, the sentiment in Europe, particularly in Brussels over the past few weeks, was a great deal of concern about the potential for a win by Nawrocki. They have been seeing this whole alliance between Nawrocki and the Law and Justice Party, PiS, as totally counterproductive for the EU, because Nawrocki has been campaigning on an agenda that says clearly that he was going to be opposed to Ukraine joining NATO, Ukraine joining EU, and that he will never endorse any decision to send Polish troops to Ukraine. So we're talking basically about a candidate who's totally opposed to some of the principles of the EU, more aligned towards Donald Trump and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And
Hashem,
this is not something widely received as a positive thing at the EU.
Okay, Hashem, thank you very much for that. Hashem Ahelbarra, live for us in Warsaw. Well, let's discuss this further, the implications of this election for the European Union, with Piotr Buras, who's head of the European Council on Foreign Relations in Warsaw, and is joining us from there. Thank you so much, Piotr, for being with us. This election was seen, as Hashem mentioned there, partly as a referendum on the EU and on Donald Trump. How, first of all, do you interpret President-elect Nawrocki's victory, and what do you think are the key factors that propelled him to the presidency?
You know, the key factor was the disappointment of a large part of the Polish population with the Tusk government, also among the voters who supported Tusk 2023 when he returned to power after 8 years of the PIS, the Conservative Nationalistic Party rule. So the Trzaskowski, the liberal candidate from Tusk's party, did not manage to mobilize all those supporters of Tusk's party from 1 year and a half ago. In fact, this is a yellow card or a red card, as some people say, against Tusk.
Right. And so Nawrocki ran on a nationalist platform. His slogan was Poles first. How do you think that message is likely to resonate within the European Union? And what kind of relationship do you anticipate he'll have with Brussels going forward? We heard the reactions there from the EU, but what do you think the relationship is going to be like?
You know, the president in Poland is not in charge of the EU and foreign policy. It is a matter of the government to run.
But he could still veto legislation.
It can veto legislation, but, foreign EU policy, there's not so much legislation in this realm. But, of course, the main implication will be that it will shrink Donald Tusk's room of maneuver in EU and foreign policy, because the president will certainly try to undermine this government, and he will try to criticize it for allegedly too pro-European course, undermining, in his eyes, the transatlantic ties between Poland and the EU. Poland and the US. Nawrocki is clearly a pro-Trumpist politician, so it will be Poland will, under his leadership, will become a country divided on its approach to the US.
Right. Let me ask you about that. I mean, you alluded to it. He's a big fan of US President Donald Trump, visited the White House during the campaign. Donald Trump, we know, is openly critical of NATO. What implications does that alignment have for Poland's future role within the NATO alliance, especially at a time of heightened regional tensions?
I think this immediate implications will be limited, because I think Nawrocki, of course, will be very committed to NATO, will support Poland's rearmament, and he will support, in general, also the Poland's support for Ukraine. But I think, the more proactive Poland's foreign policy, also with regard to Ukraine, will be hampered by Nawrocki's presidency, and especially Poland's role as a promoter of a strong EU defense.
Well, what's driving his position on Ukraine, and how do you think it will affect regional security and EU cohesion? He wants Ukraine, to get support, but he doesn't want Ukraine to be part of NATO or the EU. What's driving that, you think?
I think mostly the rising anti-Ukrainian sentiment in the Polish society, at least in part of it, on the right in the Polish society, and also his personal convictions. I mean, he's an historian, and he puts a lot of emphasis on this historical disagreements between Poland and Ukraine. There are many of them. So he pays a lot of attention to that, and so I think he's genuinely very nationalistic, and nationalism goes in Poland very often hand in hand with some anti-Ukrainian sentiments.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this. Thank you for your insight. That is Piotr Buras joining us there from Warsaw.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.